This is Norman J. Liverpool IV from What's the LGBT, and you're tuned into Hot 702.5 in FM Sound. Be sure to catch us every Saturday at 3 p.m. Pacific. This portion of What's the LGBT is brought to you in part by Rosie's Cleaning Services. Rosie's Cleaning Services is your one-stop shop for all of your housekeeping and janitorial needs. Specializing in commercial, residential, move-in and move-out cleaning, B&B preparation, and more. Rosie's Cleaning Services is ready to tackle any job, big or small. They send 3 technicians per service and bill at a flat hourly rate. With a combined experience of over 20 years, Rosie's Cleaning Services is your only choice for professional, efficient, and superior cleaning services. To learn more, please text or call 702-767-1116 or email contact@rosiescleaninglv.com. This portion of what... All right. Greetings, and yet again, greetings, everyone. You already know who it is, but in case you forgot, I do not mind giving you a slight reminder. It's your gay best friend, your good Judy, your next door neighbor, your niece, your nephew, your cousin, your gunkle, author, radio show host, all of the things, Norman J. Liverpool IV. And thank you for tuning in to another edition of What's the LGBT, right here on Hot 702.5 FM. So before we go any further, you know I've got to shout out my sponsors. So my first sponsor, you already heard their commercial, Rosie's Cleaning Services. This is your one-stop shop for anything housekeeping, anything janitorial here in Las Vegas. They send a dedicated team to your home or business. They are quick and efficient. So if you're interested in getting a quote, you can reach them at 702-767-1116. When was the last time you enjoyed a meal so delicious that your soul was satisfied? A meal that takes your taste buds back to your grandmother's cooking? Well, Ponita's Kitchen offers custom gourmet-inspired dishes from New Orleans to classic dishes like smothered chicken, oxtails, golden fried pork chops, collard greens, baked mac, seafood gumbo, banana pudding, sweet potato pie, and more. Please follow them on Facebook and Instagram at Ponita's Kitchen. That is PONITA' Kitchen for daily menus and order a dish or two. You can also reach out to Ponita's Kitchen for your custom orders. You know me, I switch it up. And Ponita is always there. Sometimes I'm not eating fish. Sometimes I'm eating chicken. She takes good care of me. Reach her at 702-480-8558. So, I'm really excited about today's show. And before we even get into it, make sure that you are liking the Hot 702.5 Facebook page. Make sure you click the bell on YouTube so you get all of the notifications. Set your timers on the app, okay? If you're like me, you're jet setting, you're moving from time zone to time zone, set the timer so that you never miss another episode of What's the LGBT. So today, we are talking about the church and the LGBTQ plus community. And for those of you that have followed me, know anything about my story, this is something that is super important to me. For those of you that don't know, I grew up in a church family in Chicago. My grandmother started the church that I grew up in. My uncle is still the pastor of that church today. My aunts and uncles have ministries all over the place. And so this is something that really means a lot to me. And it's important for me to have these types of conversations because I know for me, I felt that there was no place for me. I felt discarded. I felt unwanted. And the thing about it is growing up in a church as small as mine, where everyone is your family, is difficult to separate the family from the church member. And so you begin to feel attacked, not just from, okay, yeah, that's my grandma, but that's also my pastor. Wow. Okay. And she's telling me you're going to hell, right? Wow. So that's why it was really important for me to have this conversation. This is something that is ongoing. I've had several different episodes about this, and I'm really excited about my guest today. So Pastor Justin Ruffin is a prophetic and apostolic teacher that echoes the message of truth to the body of Christ. He serves as a leader and founder of JR Ministries and pastor of Refuge City Ministries, which is a revolutionary and contemporary church located in Maryland. Justin Ruffin is known for his revelatory teaching, accurate prophetic acumen, and his heart for people. His purpose is to activate gifts, train leaders, impart wisdom and truth, and inspire individuals to walk in destiny wholly. His desire is to watch individuals grow to their fullest potential to advance the kingdom of God. Now, before we bring Pastor Ruffin on, I want to just to quickly go over a couple of statistics. And for those of you that might have seen my Over the Rainbow episode about 2 years ago, these are some of the, about a year ago, sorry. These are some statistics that were released for the 2020 Trevor's Project Youth Survey. Of that survey, it found that 40% of the sample had seriously considered suicide. More than half of those people were trans or non-binary. 68% of the study reported generalized anxiety disorder, and 48% have engaged in self-harm. Now, of that 48%, 60% of that was trans and non-binary. Now, what was really interesting is out of this sample, 10% of the study claimed that they have underwent conversion therapy. Of that 10%, 78% said that it happened before the age of 18. So I want us to start there. That's going to be kind of where we come in. But please welcome to our virtual stage, Pastor Justin Ruffin.
Hey, how are you?
Better now. How are you?
I am doing absolutely well. A little tired, but I'm doing well.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time out to join me and the other listeners of What's the LGBT. I know I read your bio, but what about you do we need to know that's not in the bio?
I really wish you had not read the bio because that's just a snapshot of who I am. I think more than anything, I have a heart for people. And because I am a pastor, my heart is expanded in a lot of different ways. But more than that, I'm a lover of people. And I just want to see everybody be happy. And I know it sounds cliche, but that's really my desire. That's really my desire.
Okay. So let's just stay there for a minute. So talk to me. What does that mean? As a pastor in Maryland, what does that mean to you to want to see everybody be happy?
I think one of the things that happens is, and this is outside of church, just from a broad perspective, there are individuals who have to define what happiness looks like to them in whatever space or area that they're doing that. And I feel like a lot of times people feel like they have to be certain versions of themselves, or they have to do things to get along or just kind of fit in certain spaces. But I believe that true happiness comes from being you in every place and space that you occupy and just really rocking that out.
Okay, I love that. So, let's just get into it. Were you raised in the church? Is this something that you kind of was in your lineage, or is this something new for you?
It's a little bit of both. So, born and raised in the church from the days of my youth. I think my family we've always been in church. I think for me, being the type of person that I am and doing some of the things that I do, I'm the first to do a lot of those things. But preaching, preachers, all of those other things is definitely something that's in my lineage.
Okay. All right. So talk to me about your journey to get to where you are, to where you want to see everyone happy. You want to see everybody win. You want to see people living their best life is what it seems like to me. In your bio, it says that you want to inspire people and all of that. How did you get to this point? Because I would imagine if you were raised in a church similar to what I was raised in, that might have been a little challenging.
Absolutely. I think it's a whole bunch of different things, but in 2016, I was supposed to move to Chicago, and that move fell apart just in the most disastrous way. But because I was just dealing with a lot of embarrassment because of that, because my church, we had done all of these big going away celebrations and all of that. And then, of course, you probably heard about church people who scam people out of their money, people like giving gifts and all of that. So I withdrew because I was embarrassed. but that was probably not even probably, that was the best thing that could ever happen for me, because that was when I started detoxing myself from toxic religion and all of the things that I had been taught. And I really began to, it sounds churchy, but I really started to identify and know who God was for myself. And I started recognizing that a lot of what I was taught and a lot of what was preached to me, and even a lot of what I was preaching at that time, really had nothing to do with God. And it wasn't even in the Bible, but it was stuff that had just been kind of taught and passed down that I picked up and started regurgitating. And so my journey started there. I think it began there prior to that moment, but it really started in a more intentional way at that moment. And I've been here ever since.
Now, when you're saying that, you realize that maybe you were preaching or saying things that weren't biblical, but things that, we have been taught. And, I understand that. What was that journey like for the people in your circle as you evolved from this, like, okay, no, this is not right. It's time to alter my message?
Some people were okay with it. Some people were like, well, I don't really understand. But I didn't encounter a lot of resistance. From the perspective of people saying, I don't want to listen to him anymore, or anything like that. They were willing to actually sit and understand because of the way that it was presented. It wasn't necessarily to say you're stupid because you're wrong and you've been teaching this. It was more of a place or a meeting point, a place of grace is what I like to call it. But I was like, okay, no, this is what we've been taught, but this is what it really says. Now, because we are reading this and we're understanding this in a different way, let's move on and let's live our lives differently and engage with people in a different way.
Okay, I like that. And you mentioned something a few moments ago about disengaging or detoxing from toxic religion. What is toxic religion?
It is, in my opinion, it is the type of preaching or the type of gospel that makes an individual or a group of individuals feel as if they don't have the right to have a relationship with God, that they're not accepted in certain spaces, that they are unlovable or unworthy, whatever you want to call it, insert that word there, because of the way that they choose to live their lives, or because of something that they believe that doesn't necessarily fit what other people believe. So anything that works to ostracize people and make them conform to something that they may not be ready for, that they may not be open to, or that they just may not understand, to me, is the definition of toxic religion.
So when we're talking about the treatment of the LGBTQ plus community, and obviously as a pastor, I know that this is something that's very sensitive, and even to take it a step beyond that is even, I don't want to say more sensitive, but very much so within the Black community. Like as a Black gay man myself, I've always felt that I was too Black for non-Black people and too gay for Black folks. And there was always this weird line that you had to walk to kind of be accepted in both spaces. Where does this come from in the Black church? And not saying that you can speak for the entire Black church, but in your experience, where does that come from?
I think it comes from, and again, in my limited experience, I think it comes from just a lack of education, a lack of understanding, but more than that, a lack of willingness to understand what is different than what you've been taught and trained and raised to believe.
So what is your position? Let's just go there. What is your position? Okay. There's LGBTQ people out there, and there's many of those people who are still seeking God, religion, seeking community, if you will. What is your position?
My position is that everybody, and this is not that cliche all are welcome thing that everybody says but really don't believe it. I believe that everybody, regardless of their sexual orientation, preference, pronouns, identification factors, all of that there is a space in church, and I use the word church loosely, but there is a space in religion, there's a space in God, there's a place of relationship that everybody can achieve if that is what they desire. If they don't, that's fine. But if they do, there's definitely a space for you. And I believe that's the foundation of everything that I do.
I love that. So to share a little story from me, as I mentioned at the top of the show, I come from a very it's a big family, but a small family at the same time. It's a large family in number, but small in the fact that we're very knit together. And one of the things that what drew me away from going to church, the building, was the fact that the people could, which were my family, could say, "Oh, I love you, Norman. I love you so much. Wow, get up here and sing with the choir. Oh my gosh, you have all these amazing gifts. Thank you for the gifts that you bring." And then on the flip side, you're going to hell for being gay. You're walking too fast. Your wrist is a little too weak. All of those things. So, do you think that this is something that is more prevalent or specific to the Black experience?
I would say yes, only because that's the only experience that I know. I feel like your story is similar to mine, which is similar to a lot of people that I know. All Black, all born in church, raised in church, or even just attended church. But that was, and even for Black families that didn't necessarily attend church, that was the language, that was the conversation, that was all of the stuff. Like there were people that I know rather, whose families didn't necessarily go to church, but they still had that same, oh, you want to help because you're sweet, or because you're this or because you're that. So I really think that it's probably something that happens across the board. But I think the way that it is handled in other racial groups or ethnicities is a lot different than the way that we experience it as Black people.
So when does there's always a thin line, at least for me, between concern and bashing, right? There's that very thin line of I'm concerned for you legitimately, and I do believe in my experience, I did see some of that. I do believe that there were some people in my life who were legitimately concerned because they, in their heart, based on what they were taught, they really believed that I was going to hell. Right. And so I don't want to take that away because I believe what I believe and other people believe what they believe. But where is this line? Where does concern turn into gay bashing or bashing of the LGBTQ plus community?
I think for me, concern and bashing it's not a thin line, it's a very thick line. When I'm concerned about somebody, I'm seeking to kind of figure out where they are, what they need, if I can help. And it's more of a matter of like just wanting to know, wanting to see, wanting to hear. I feel like the intent of bashing is completely different than that of concern. Because if I'm concerned about you or something that you're doing or something that you might be involved in, the way that I address you and the way that I approach you is going to be completely different than it is if I'm bashing you. And so I feel like the line happens in the heart. It is created in the heart, and then from there it is manifested through the intentions of that speech or of that conversation.
All right. Well, I like that. So, really quick, if you guys are just tuning in, you are here on What's the LGBT right here on hot7025fm.com. And we're talking with Pastor Justin Ruffin, and we're talking about the church and the LGBTQ plus community. Thank you for all of the viewers who are leaving comments, all of the listeners who are engaging, because this is a conversation that is needed. And I would like to invite you to share this post. If it might not be for you, it might be someone on your friends list that may need to hear this. Where is the intersection? I feel like for me, it was almost like just kind of throwing an arrow out into the wilderness. Like I never knew where that intersection was. And to be completely honest, that's one of the things that pulled me away from organized religion in that way, because I was like, well, how can I all day, every day be this person? And then on this day, I have to be another person. So where is the intersectionality or the point of connection between, because I think so many times we talk about the disconnect, right? The disconnect between the church and the LGBT community. But where is that point of connection, and how would one even go about finding that?
That's a loaded question. I'll try to keep it brief. I really think that the point of connection comes within people, right? They've got to identify that point of connection for themselves. and then really start having conversations with the individuals that attend their churches, right? Like you said, in your experience, you were singing, you were in the choir, you had all of these gifts, right? So you were accepted in certain facets, but then there were other parts of you that people didn't like. I think the intersection comes from the fact that we understand that there are people who have entered the section of church, the section of this space, and that it's not something that we glaze or gloss over. Because here's just my perspective: if I'm going to allow you to serve in all of these various capacities, knowing what I know, then I shouldn't address it. And if it's that big of a problem, then you shouldn't be doing it. And I just feel like we gotta this whole perspective of using people, whether they are gay, straight, or anything else, for their gifts and their talents, but then despising parts of them or who they are, who they claim or identify to be. I think if we're going to grow up and be mature and sober, we got to say either I want all of you or none of you, and let people make their choice as to whether or not they say I want to do this or I don't want to do that. I think the point of grace, or the point of connection comes in when everybody is willing to understand and not understand the other side from the perspective of proving my point or proving you wrong, but just to understand where we start so that we can kind of bridge that gap or make those points of connection.
So what do you say to the person who is like, I hear you, Pastor, I hear you, but that just isn't for me no more. You do what you're doing, but because of what I've been through, I just don't even want to entertain that anymore. What do you say to that person?
First, we got to have a deeper conversation. But I think that one of the first things I would want to ask them is, and this is where it gets challenging, and I don't want people to feel like this is their bashing moment, but it's like, was your relationship with God or was it with people? One of the things I've recognized is that there are a lot of people who they come to know God through what they are presented by other people. Oftentimes, most times, that is flawed because people are people. And in my experience, when I have this same conversation with other people, they say, well, I don't go to church because of this or because of that. And it's usually a people thing. It's never a God thing. It's never them saying, I heard the voice of God tell me I'm going to hell because I'm gay. It's their pastor who said it. It's their mom who said it. It's their uncle or their dad who said it. And so from that perspective, I would challenge them to identify who their relationship was with. Was it with people or was it with God? If it was with God, then you do your thing. And you and God work that out. But if it was with people, I would challenge them to go back and really try to start the journey of really building that authentic relationship with God. And in my experience, I would tell them that they would probably find that the things that were said to them on the behalf of God actually had no reflection of him. They didn't reflect or resemble him at all.
And see, that's an interesting concept for me because, and I think in my logical mind, like to think of that concept being where I'm at today, I can see that makes sense. Like, okay, this is what my uncle said to me. This is what, whoever said this to me. But you have to get to that point. I remember feeling so hurt. And so because at that time, especially when you're young and just literally trying to figure out who you are as self, who you are as person. And I think one of the things that was the most challenging for me growing up is I had so many external sources telling me who I was. And I felt like I couldn't go through that natural progression. I had the kids at school calling me faggot, pussy, sissy, all of these things, right? Before I even knew what gay was. And then I have my family saying, "Oh, you, something's a little off there." So it was like no matter where I went, someone or some group of people were telling me who Norman was. And so for me, I spun my wheels for years on this, I guess, what do you call it, like a hamster wheel of running around as who these people say I am. And so a lot of that was internalized, but I think something that you said, and I don't know if this is what you meant, but the way that I interpret it was, it has to start with a conversation, and sometimes that conversation has to start with the one we have with ourselves. Like, why do I feel this way? Like you said, how, who said this? Who was the one that made me feel this way or said the thing? But how do you separate these figureheads, the people that you look to for guidance, the people that you, for a lot of people, really believe that their salvation to an extent is in these people's hands. How do you then begin to separate that and say that is the person and not the overall belief, not the religion, not the consensus?
I think that the place that you start, and of course, like you say, you're younger, you're really trying to figure these things out. But as you grow and you become more mature, I think that that's when you start to recognize, okay, like this is this, and this is that, and this is just really not what this is. It takes some time. It takes some time. It takes some experience, right? Because without the experience of having all of those things, then you never have anything within you that starts to even bud, to spark that conversation. So unfortunately, it takes some negative experiences with church people. It takes some disappointment. It takes some hurt. I'm not going to say that it takes bashing, but it takes some disappointment. It takes some questionable moments and experiences for you to really start that journey. I think that for younger people, sometimes they just don't have the wherewithal to process that. Like you said, they're school and they're this and that. Like they have so many things that are just trying to show them and direct them. Teachers are telling you to be a leader, and you really just don't even want to do that. Like all of these things are competing. But I think that when you get to a place of maturity, that you can really start to, just like we do it with any other relationship. You know what? Like Norman and I were really cool, but he had a bad day, and so he kind of snapped on me. Like I can separate Norman, who might be dealing with something in his life, from my friend Norman, who I know loves me, right? We do this with every other place or every kind of relationship, but when it comes to the church, things are a little different because of those things. I also think, going back to something that you said, that people have to realize that their salvation isn't in the hands of any person but themselves, right? It's not in the hands of the devil. It's not in the hands of your pastor or anybody else. It is literally in the hands of you. And if you choose to live a safe life, if you choose to do that, then you will do what it takes to do it. But I think, again, that's a level of maturity that most people don't start out with, especially when you're just coming into that space. It's a level of sobriety that a lot of people just don't walk in because they don't know it exists, oftentimes because of the poor presentation that they have been given. But I think when you start to recognize that you can really start to understand and start making some strides into this topic or this concept that people start quoting, but sometimes even still don't even believe that, when they start talking about relationship over religion. When you really start to live that or go after that, then it makes things a lot easier for you to separate and say, you know what, you might be a little foul as a person, and I get all of that, but it's one of those old things where they say chew the meat and spit out the bones, like that kind of thing. I think we start doing that, but you got to have teeth to do that. So yeah.
Okay. So is there a safe place for LGBTQ people in the church?
I want to say yes and no. I'll say yes because I think from a broad, from a more specified perspective, there is. And this has nothing to do with affirming churches or anything like that, but it has everything to do with the fact that there are legitimate communities and tribes and groups and, all of those other things that are really welcoming to people or of people that are part of the LGBTQ plus community. But from a larger perspective, I'm gonna say no, because we've seen it. We've heard it. We have experienced it, right? You and myself, and I'm sure many of the other people that are listening and watching, we've experienced that lack of safety that exists and is the more prevalent presentation of church.
So then, for those that desire that, because not everyone desires that level of community, that or to be in church, in the building in church. I know that's something that's not desirable to me. But for those who desire that, where do we start the conversation of an allyship or creating the conversations or initiating the conversations in these spaces to say, okay, I get it. This is where we are now, but how do we move the needle forward?
I think it starts with just identifying or having the conversation about willingness, right? Are these people, or is this group willing to do that? I think that from a level of respect, right? If you're not willing to do something, and then I can't force you, right? If I buy you a
Mm-hmm.
blue shirt and you are not willing to wear it, I cannot make you wear that blue shirt. I'm gonna take it back and
Mm-hmm.
get my money back because you don't want it. But I think that there are
Right.
some pastors, some churches who are not willing to have this conversation. So I think just as a matter of respect for you and for them, you move on. But there are some that are willing to have it, but they do not know how to facilitate it. They just don't.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this
Okay.
is where all of the boldness, all of the things that we claim that we are, and so on and so forth. I think this is where, on either side, whether you're part of the LGBTQ plus community or you're part of the church, and you really want to see this gap bridged, that you're willing to say, this is what I desire, and you're willing to take the ridicule. You're willing to take it. I remember when I first started talking to individuals about what the Bible does not say about homosexuality, I was prepared for ridicule. I was prepared for people to get off the
Mm-hmm.
live. I was prepared for them to leave the service and say, I'm not listening to him anymore. As I shared with
Mm-hmm.
you earlier, I'm a man who is well acquainted with the homosexual experience. And so when I shared my story and my testimony in other places, things that I've experienced, I was looking for the shutdown. I was anticipating people to say, just stop it. But they
Okay.
were
No.
willing to hear. And that's where I think that whole, how do we move the needle forward? People have to be willing, and then we move from the place of willingness. Amen.
All right. Well, before we go, because you provided the perfect segue to where I want to go next. So thank you for that. So for those of you that are just tuning in, we are on What's the LGBT right here on Hot 7025 FM, and we are talking with Pastor Justin Ruffin, and we are talking about the church. We are talking about the LGBTQ plus community. And now we are going to get a little bit more of an education because, see, as you know, I talk about conversation, exposure, and education. Those are the only ways, or some of the majority of ways that we can get things to move. So I'm glad you brought up this concept of a man that is familiar with the homosexual experience. So are you gay?
Yeah.
Okay. And is
I
that
want
is that
people
something
to
that you find difficult? Is that something you find difficult to say?
I used to. I used to. Just because of what I was taught. But I mean, if we're going to be honest and share experiences, I think we've got to be honest with everybody.
Okay. So
It's not
what
a
does that
question
look?
and I get asked often, but yeah.
So okay. So help us to understand, what does that look like for a black gay male pastor with the heart of people that you desire to inspire, to train, and empower people? What kind of backlash? Well, I mean, maybe you haven't, because you said many people don't ask you. But I guess what I'm trying to get to is, there are so many people like me who grew up in the LGBT part of the LGBTQ plus community and didn't even know it, right? We're going to the church and we can't find anyone that represents us. We don't see anyone that makes us feel like we're not weird or that we're other, right? So why not lead with that part so that someone else could say, you know what, I can feel free to be me in this space?
So one of the reasons that I don't necessarily lead with that is because as a minister of the gospel, my job is to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. That is
Got
going
it.
to be the draw. And I get representation, I understand that, but in my personal experience, I feel like if you're going to be liberated, you're going to be liberated because of the gospel, not because you identify with me. Because if we start doing things just based on what we can identify with, we're going to miss a lot of important moments in our lives, right? There are certain things that you have probably been through that I can't identify with. It doesn't mean that I can't hear your truth. And vice versa. There are some things that I have identified with or that I can identify with. And it doesn't mean that what your experiences are in those spaces are any less important than mine because of that. And I also find that when people start labeling things, that we actually do a greater job of dividing people than we do of bringing people together. So for me, I don't call myself a gay preacher. I'm a preacher.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe in going to gay church. It's a church, and gay people will go there. Because if we start labeling or identifying people or things or places by the type of people that go there, everything is gay. gay malls, gay car dealerships, gay hospitals. It's a building, and I get it. We want to understand it, we want to know, and all of that. But I think that when we really start focusing on what is important, that some of those other things really don't need to exist in that space, because that's not the goal. That's not the goal.
Okay. I'm letting that marinate. I don't think that I've ever heard that in that way. So I'm gonna let that marinate, and we're gonna come back around. We're gonna come back
Absolutely.
around to that. So when we're talking about conversation, exposure, and education, what role does the church have in initiating these things? You know, like you said, the draw is the gospel, the draw is this. So if that is going to be the thing that brings me in, what is the responsibility of the church to initiate these conversations, to initiate exposure and education around the LGBTQ plus community?
I think the position or the place of the church is to actually preach truth. And not truth based on perception, not truth based on my personal preference, but to teach the truth of what's in there. One of the things I tell people is that we will study, preachers, pastors, whatever, we will look at Greek and Hebrew and every other language when we're preparing for other messages. But when it comes down to a message about the LGBTQ plus community, then it's only what's written in there, right? If you do your research, and this is just not to be all of that, but when you do your research, what we come to understand is that a lot of the scriptures that people use, that individuals use to defend their points of bashing the church really aren't what the Bible says, right? People are probably going to go to Leviticus, man shall not lay with man as he does with women, so on and so forth. But when we understand that the word homosexuality was put in the Bible later after it was, originally spoken, the word that was originally used there was pedophilia, then it's like, okay, well, now what do I have to stand on, right? They're probably going to talk to you about Sodom and Gomorrah and all of those other things, right? And they're probably going to use that even based on the Ten Commandments. But then we also understand that at the time of Sodom and Gomorrah, the Ten Commandments did not exist, so that like it was a time that we would consider before the law, if we're going to say that the Ten Commandments was the law. So it just isn't there. And I think that people have done a great job at defending their points, but it's an uninformed point. So I think that when individuals are willing to learn the truth, then they can teach the truth. And that is a truth that liberates, because the truth is what makes us free. But the challenge with truth is that it is also relative. So that's a whole nother can of worms.
So I want to make sure that I understand, and therefore the listeners understand. So when we're talking about truth, and just referencing the passage that you mentioned about Leviticus, where man should not lie with man as with woman. Mm-hmm. Are you saying that the way that it may be presented as truth is really not? Because we have not done the research?
Absolutely.
So then, this is interesting. See, there definitely have to be a part two. Because so now my question, my message becomes, that's the literal scripture, right? So then how do we begin to, as someone that has not studied as much as you, for me, how do I then begin to like, if I were to read that, how would I discern, or how would I know that is not what it actually meant?
And again, this is for whoever wants to do it. I think that when you really want to know something, you'll search it out. You'll search it. Preachers, pastors, again, preparing for messages. Okay, what does this word mean? And we look at origins, and we look at, background and text, and, all of these things. And if I can do that because I want to know all of the different 50,000 words of love and, forgiveness and understanding, I should be willing to apply that same study model to everything that's in the Word of God, right? Because again, we're looking at context, we're looking at time, we're looking at culture, we're looking at all of these other things. And a lot of times people look at that, we take it at face value. That can't be done. There's a scripture in the New Testament that talks about how there is that there will be more space made for the people of Sodom and Gomorrah that are bashed for being gay and all of this other stuff than there is for the individual who knows the Word of God and refuses to do it. A lot of this is like, is it really that? Because from a broad or from a generalized perspective, everybody in the world is in some level of a same-sex relationship. You may not be having actual intercourse with them, but we are all in relationship with someone of the same sex. It happens. And so when we start looking at some of the things that people preach and the way that they preach it is wrong. But again, beyond all of that, everybody is entitled to their belief. Absolutely. The challenge or the problem comes in where we exalt our beliefs over that of others and make them feel as if, especially from people in leadership and pulpits and preachers and stuff like that, when we start making individuals feel that they are less than or they are some way or in some way beneath us because they don't believe what we believe.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to really answer that, because I know for me, there was always this weird thing, like, okay, like you read it, but then then there's this whole concept of interpretation and all of this other stuff. And as you were mentioning, studying the etymology of words, and there was a book that I read that truly revolutionized my life, and it's called "The Children Are Free." And it was written by Jeff Miner. And that book did exactly what you just said. It took the etymology, it researched the different words so that there was more of a clear understanding. And I know for me in my journey, I received that book at 21 years old, right before I came out. I will never forget it. And I was this like diehard, literally trying to pray the gay out of myself. And I had a friend named Mark, and I hope Mark one day, I've been trying to find Mark for years. But he gave me this book. And when I read that, it was almost like a sigh of relief. It was like, whew, okay, like it made me feel like, okay, I can still operate in the things that I like to do and still have relationship. And so I find that, again, that started with a conversation. That started with a conversation that I had with Mark. That started with a conversation of me going back and forth and not really, understanding. So as we begin to, wind down, and for those of you that are just tuning in, you have missed a lot. So I invite you to go back to the replay because we have covered a lot. And if you're up to it, Pastor, I definitely want to have you back because I feel that there's even more that we can dive into here. But we are here with Pastor Justin Ruffin, and we're talking about the church and the LGBT community. And it's coming from a place of love. I've had other pastors on my show, and in fact, I'm pretty sure they may be listening. My aunt and uncle I was on a show with them, and I have never felt so defensive in my life, to the point that I told my cousin, if you ever invite me on this show with them, the answer is no. So I appreciate you coming in with a spirit of love and being, as you said, willing, having that willingness to have this conversation. So we've just touched the surface on a lot of this. I feel like we could do a 4-part series literally on all of this. But where we are right now, Pastor, is how do we begin to resolve these issues? I know we've talked about conversation, we've talked about exposure, we've talked about education, but this is my position on it. My position is the church, and I use that word loosely. Again, it's not everyone that goes to church, but the church is the one that has initiated this sense of other. Okay, and this is my opinion. The church is the one that says you don't belong, or you're going here, or you can't live like this and do that. So now that, okay, so knowing that that's where it started, knowing that that's where the weight of the responsibility is, how do we move forward knowing that a majority of the responsibility for the healing is going to have to come from the source of the hurt?
Okay, so there are a couple of different ways to look at it. I'm gonna try to kind of wrap this up because I know we gotta go. I think that what is most important is that we recognize on either side. Again, we start from that place of willingness. And I think what you said, we've been doing a lot of talking. We've been talking about having conversation. We've been talking about, you know, doing it, but we've not actually put the legs to that talk to actually make it happen. And I think that is where it starts, that we stop talking and we start doing, that we actually reach out to pastors and say, hey, even if it's one or two, that we say, hey, listen, this is what I want to do. Like, I want there to be, I want there to be a level of connection here. And this is not to say that I want to come in and just do all of this stuff at your church. But if I need a word, right, whether I want to come or not, if I want to be a consistent member, or if I just need something once a month, I don't want you to see me come in with whatever I have going on and feel worse off than I was when I came. I think that it's a lot of people that love talking because it sounds good and it gets you the membership, right? It gets you that initial engagement. But we've got to do something more than talk. We've got to do something more than talk. And it's going to take somebody from both sides to start pioneering and championing in that work to say, this is what it is. And then, of course, like any great movement that starts small, then the momentum will actually start rolling and then other people will start to join. And it could be on either side. It could be, this is my experience. I was actually, I wanted to plan something and I just kind of got too busy, but it's one of the things that I plan on doing. Because again, as a man who is familiar with the homosexual experience, there are still other parts of this community that I just don't know. And I don't understand it, right? The whole, I don't know the trans experience. I don't know what it's about. I don't demean anybody for it. I just don't understand it. And so I want to bring individuals of other identifications and, you know, other specific, all of those other things together so that we can really have a real conversation. There are parents who have children who are trans and they don't know how to interact or engage with their children. It's causing strain in homes, not because they are resistant, but they're ignorant and ignorant from the place of definition, lacking education awareness and understanding. They just don't know. And when we recognize that a lot of people, because they don't know, are going to do what they do or don't do, then we start to understand. And that's where that connection comes in. I can't fault you for what you don't know, especially when I have the information. And if I keep it from you, then you'll continue to walk in that ignorance. So I think it starts with us actually putting legs to the talk that we've been having.
Well, I will tell you, and I will be your first volunteer. You can count me in to that experience. I would love to be a part of that. So as we get ready to wind down, Pastor, what kind of projects do you have working on? Talk about some books. How can we give us a little rundown of what we can expect to see from you coming soon?
So I just released my 12th book. It's a book on prayer, but it's prayer from a practical perspective. I have a book that I wanted to talk about a little bit. It's called Dear Teacher. And there's a section in the book where I talk about the whole treatment of LGBTQ members in church and looking at different scriptures and different things like that. It's not a long section because it's something of a greater conversation. But I'm doing a lot, so they can find me on Facebook or all of these other places. But it's really just a place where I'm a person who I just really want people to understand and to walk with truth, because when you're armed with truth, you don't really pay attention to the lies. So yeah, writing books, publishing books, and doing all of the other great, wonderful things I do.
Well, I love it. And again, thank you so much for being here on What's the LGBT here at Hot 725 FM. It's been an honor talking to you. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope that this is just the start of the conversation as we move into action. So again, for those of you that are just tuning in, go back and rewatch the replay. You already know who it is. It's your gay best friend, your good Judy, your next door neighbor, your niece, your nephew, your cousin. I'm all of the things. It is Norman J. Liverpool. Make sure you keep it locked here every Saturday at 3 p.m. for What's the LG